So this is what you have learned just now, the woven wheel as well as the lazy daisy. And this is what we are going to learn next. The back stitch, which we can use to sew different words or letterings, as well as how do we use the lazy daisy to sew into different flower patterns. To sew a word, usually I will draw first. We can either use, there are two different types of marker in the local sewing stores. One is usually water erasable, meaning that once the ink touches water, the ink disappears. The other one is the air erasable pen, which usually comes in the purple or the pink color. With air erasable pen, the ink disappears between 12 to 14 hours. For this project, I'm using the water erasable pen. I have written down the word with this. Once my project is done, I can dip it in water and the ink disappears. I'm going to sew the word with the back stitch. Okay, so once you have thread your needle, we sew the word as how we will write it. So I'm going to start here, the first stitch, following the line that you have written, and we move forward, and our needle goes back to the exact point of the previous stitch. Okay. We go forward, and our needle goes back to the same hole of the previous stitch. Okay. We come up, and then we go back to the previous stitch. Okay, we will follow the line of how we will write the word. And back. You want to keep the stitch even, so with each stitch, you go for the straighter lines, it can be slightly longer, but for where the curves are, the stitches are slightly shorter. Okay, so try to make each stitch as even as possible. And we follow the line that we write. Forward and back to the hole of the previous stitch. So come up. So we do not want to leave a gap between your previous stitch, or else then you'll see that there's a gap. Okay? So what we want is a seamless line back to the hole. So if you accidentally, okay, if it's totally out of the line, what I will do is actually to remove my needle again and undo that stitch. Okay, thread it back. Okay, and then go back on. So once there's a mistake, you want to undo it immediately, because if you allow the mistake to be there, it's harder to undo that mistake after. Okay, so you want to be very careful when we sew the words. Okay, so what you can see here is that when there's a curve, your stitches are slightly shorter, and when it's a straight line, it's slightly longer. So if you run out of the thread, what you actually do is to cut another longer strand, thread it through the needle, and then continue. Okay, likewise, how we end it is to turn it around, put our needle through the back of the stitch. Okay. Yep. Leave a 1 cm tail and then we cut it off. Alright, that's the end. So this is what we have done, the finished wording with our back stitch. So for the next stitch, we are going to use our lazy daisy to sew into a flower. Alright, so we make a loop for one of the petals. Yep. So depending on how long we want our petal to be, that will determine where our needle come out from. Okay, secure this stitch and in. The next one just beside. And what you want to create is to have the petal to be the same length as the previous one. Okay. 2. And the last petal that makes up the flower. Okay. Same when we end under the stitch and pull. That's one flower. Next we will sew the stems. So what I'm going to do is to a stem down and then the other stem up for the other flower. So for the stem we are going to use the back stitch, which is the one that we use for our word. Ensure that our stitches are as even and equal length as possible. Okay, that's one. For the other, it goes up. Alright, I end off the stitch by putting under the needle, under the thread, once, and through the hole, and we pull. Okay, leave a 1 cm tail and cut. I'm going to have another woven wheel flower at the top. So for the woven wheel flower, we can start our first line from the stem, from the top of the stem to the middle of the flower. This will determine how big our flower is. Okay, 5 lines, outside, in, our needle comes up anywhere from in between the lines, and we thread the alternate stitches. thread through, skip the next one, skip this stitch and into the next one. Once we can't see any of the lines at the side, we tuck our needle through from the side, gently pull it through the fabric, okay, turn it around, and then we can tie off our needle, our thread. Okay. And we pull. All right, 1 cm away, and we cut. We are going to use the same lazy daisy stitches to sew the leaves on the stem. Okay. I'm going to have 2 leaves at the side here and 1 on the left. So we create a loop just at the side. And through the loop. And our needle comes up in the middle of this loop. Up. Secure this loop on the outside. We also want to give a bit of variation to the size of the leaves. So for this one, I'll make it slightly shorter and the next one longer than this previous stitch. Next one is slightly longer. All right. There we go. My other leaf is on the left. All right. To have the little bush, we have 1 leaf on the left, same lazy daisy stitch. Okay, secure this on the left, the next one on the right. Second one. Next one on the left. All right. On the right. Secure it. Our last leaf is right in the middle. Up. Okay. We secure the last one. And there we have it. Okay. Pull it tight and we cut. And there we have it. So this is what we have sewn. Made out of the back stitch in the words and the stems, the lazy for this flower, the lace as well as the bush, and the woven wheel stitch for this rose here. So having learned the different stitches in the last two videos, the different stitches on the mask as well as in this design, you can make the different stitches into a flower design and onto the different words as well. So after learning these basic stitches, you can expand your repertoire of stitches to create more complex designs such as this flower bouquet, this heart design, or even this eye words, or this one here. Hand embroidery is actually very freeing and flexible. You are not defined by certain rules. As long as you have the right techniques and the right materials, you are free to explore with this. So what you can do is actually to use other threads. Of course, if you use yarns or thicker threads, then you might need to use a thicker sized needles. You don't always have to stitch on cotton. You can even stitch on thicker fabrics such as on your jacket, on jeans, on even leather, but then you just have to use the correct tool such as a thicker needle or even a thicker thread or stronger thread as well. Apart from hand embroidery, I also teach sashiko. Sashiko is the Japanese cousin of hand embroidery. It stems from the Edo period and is a lot more structured and ordered. On days where I do not have the creative jewels, I will just want to follow a certain pattern and sew. So I still get my sewing done that way. I hope after watching this, you'll find that hand embroidery is actually not as difficult as you thought. As long as you take the first step to pick it up, anything is actually possible. If you have any more questions, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram at AllyCraftsCo.